Today I'm going to share with you my favorite red velvet cupcake recipe. If you haven't tried red velvet before, or if you maybe didn't like it, you haven't had a good red velvet cupcake. A red velvet cupcake is kind of a halfway house between a vanilla cupcake and a chocolate cupcake. It does have cocoa powder in it, but it doesn't taste like a chocolate cake. It is so delicious when done right, especially if you top it with a nice cream cheese frosting. It has a really nice light crumb, and if you get the balance perfect, you will not look back. This is one of my favorite cupcakes. The first thing we want to do is preheat the oven to 170 degrees Celsius, and then we can get started. First thing we're going to do is start by sifting the dry ingredients. We've got our plain flour, corn flour, cocoa powder, and our bicarb of soda. We want to sift everything together to make sure that it perfectly combines. Because we are using a little bit of cocoa powder, the last thing we want is for that cocoa powder to not evenly distribute through the rest of the dry ingredients. So I don't usually sift my plain flour, but I am gonna just chuck that through nice and quick, and then the corn flour as well. If we don't sift those dry ingredients, we might get a little bit of a clump of corn flour or cocoa powder, and we are going for perfection every time. Wow. Half of it is now on the table. Okay, so the last thing we're gonna sift in is our cocoa powder, and then we're just gonna set that to the side. The next thing we're gonna do in the bowl of a stand mixer is place our unsalted butter. I'm always using room temperature butter for any of my cakes, just so that it doesn't need a lot of beating to get nice and light and fluffy. And then we can just put that on a low setting. Grab our sugar, and we're gonna place that in the bowl as well. So we're just gonna beat that together until we have a really nice and fluffy mixture, creaming the butter and the sugar together. And then always just scraping down the sides of the bowl as we go. Make sure that that butter doesn't stick all the way through to the bottom of the bowl. Now you will notice with this recipe that a red velvet cupcake doesn't use as much butter to sugar ratio, so it hasn't had the same consistency as a nice creamed butter and sugar for, say, a chocolate cupcake or a vanilla cupcake. That's because we're also going to add oil into the mixture, which is one of the secret ingredients to get that really nice soft crumb. We're going to add 2 eggs. I'm always using large size eggs for my recipes. And then on a low setting, we're just gonna put those in one by one. Once you add your eggs into any cake mixture, it's really important not to overmix. So you really just wanna mix everything until it is just combined. We're really just making sure that we're not incorporating too much air into the mixture. Now we're going to add our vanilla. So if you don't have buttermilk and a recipe calls for buttermilk, a really easy way to make your own buttermilk is to take your milk and then add a dash of vinegar. Also lemon juice will do the trick. But you have to make sure that the milk is at room temperature, because otherwise the milk won't curdle. And essentially what we're doing is just mixing that acid into the milk, which will allow the milk to curdle. And then we're gonna get that same consistency as buttermilk. So there you can see we've made our own buttermilk, and you've got that curdled milk texture. And then also that little bit of acid is going to help to balance out the flavor. On a low setting, we're gonna pour that in. Then we've got the oil and our dry ingredients, which we already pre-sifted. One thing you might notice is missing is kind of an essential ingredient. That is our red food dye. A little bit in the side there. Mix that all together, and then we have the perfect red velvet cupcake. Pinch of salt. Did I forget the ingredient? Maybe, I don't know. Perfect. I'm just gonna get my spatula and give that a little mix around just to make sure that everything is incorporated, because we really want that cake base to be really nice and red and rich, and that way we have the perfect red velvet cupcakes. Then when you bite into it, you have this nice glossy cream cheese frosting on top and the perfect moist crumb for the cake on the bottom. The next thing we're gonna do is line our cupcake tray. If you can find red cupcake liners, I find that they always look really good with the red velvet base. However, if white's all you have, in my case, then whatever you have will work. It's really just about the aesthetics. Now this mixture is a little bit runnier to say like a classic chocolate cake or a vanilla cake. So it's easier to actually pour this one in rather than using an ice cream scoop to individually portion each one. So I'm just gonna go nice and slow and steady. And then I'm gonna use this spoon just to stop that batter. The important thing that we're aiming for here is for all of those cupcakes to be the same size or the same weight of batter. Essentially, we're aiming for just over half, a little bit less than 3/4. Okay, so we're gonna give them a little tap on the bench just to make sure that batter is evenly distributed. And then we're gonna place those in the oven at 170 degrees Celsius for around, I'm gonna keep an eye on them from around 16 minutes. So now the cupcakes are cooling, we are going to get to work on our cream cheese frosting. I honestly could eat this just straight out of the bowl. It is so delicious and really rich and creamy. First thing we're gonna do is place our icing sugar through a sieve. We always want to sift the icing sugar just to make sure that we don't get clumps, especially when you want like a nice glossy buttercream. The last thing you want is a big chunk of icing sugar. Well, I don't know, it actually doesn't sound that bad now that I think about it. Okay, we're gonna get a spoon to speed that up. So we're just gonna sift that icing sugar into a nice big bowl before it goes into our mixer. We're gonna start by placing the butter in the bowl of a stand mixer. I'm gonna let the butter beat up so it gets nice and light and fluffy, and then I'm gonna add the cream cheese. So we'll start that one, I would say on a medium. Before we put the cream cheese in, I'm just gonna break it up a little bit so that it goes in chunks, roughly about like 1 inch by 1 inch. I wish you guys could smell this through the screen. I love cream cheese. I think this is one of my vices that if ever there's like cream cheese on anything, I'm going straight in. I'm gonna scrape the bottom of that bowl just to make sure that all of that cream cheese is really incorporating with that butter. We want everything to be really nice and silky smooth before the icing sugar goes in. I'm also going to add a teaspoon of vanilla, and that will really help give it a nice strong flavor. So there you can see that's a really nice pale color. And that's the mixture of the butter that has perfectly combined with all of the cream cheese, and then whipping that air into it has made it nice and light and fluffy. Okay, the last thing we need to add is our icing sugar. I like to go nice and low and slow with this because if you add it all at once, it kind of just goes up in a puff like a smoke, puff of smoke, a puff of clouds, a puff of, puff goes the dragon, I don't know. I'm gonna add it nice and low and slow. Just like a spoonful at a time until everything is incorporated. So there we have our cream cheese frosting. You can see like the elasticity of the texture that you're going for. So it's nice and creamy, but it's also not too wet. You want to make sure that everything is totally incorporated. You've got all that air whipped into the buttercream, and then it's going to be nice and glossy when we pipe it on top of those red velvet cupcakes. It's time to pipe. So here I have my piping bag. Now it's up to you if you want to use a fancy tip, like maybe say an open star tip and get like a nice little swirl, that way you can. I personally prefer just a round tip on a red velvet cupcake. So I'm just gonna put it straight into our piping bag. Okie dokie, then I need my scissors. So I've got some of the cream cheese in there. I'm not gonna pipe them all today, so I'm just gonna cut off, you see there the tip of the piping bag. I'm just gonna cut that one off. And then from the top, I'm pushing it down nice and slow and steady and gently while I turn the top of the bag. That's gonna push that cream cheese frosting down towards the open round center. And then just starting out in the center, pushing out towards the sides and a little swirl. It's that easy. Yay! Cute. So there's lots of different ways you can decorate a cupcake. The way that we do it in the bakery, and my favorite, is actually just to use the red velvet crumb. So I'm gonna go straight into the bottom of the cupcake there. You can see the exterior is a little bit more firm, but down in there is where that really nice soft crumb is. So I'm gonna take a little bit of that and just sprinkle it on the top. And that way you can see those pops of red and it immediately tells you this is a red velvet cupcake. It is mandatory to make a mess, so get a little bit sprinkle happy. Wow, come back. All right, there you have it. This is the perfect red velvet cupcake. It is so delicious and moist when you bite into it, but it has this really soft crumb. It melts away with the cream cheese frosting on top. It's super creamy, super delicious, and then a nice little sprinkle on top because I just think it looks cute like that, and I'm all about the aesthetics. Should we try? Get in there. Have a look at that. So good. There's just something about cream cheese, which is like, it always tastes good. That is really good. Thanks for watching. Cut.